I never intended to rebuild a civilization that allegedly never was. However, when you dedicate enough time to studying the architectural remnants, industrial relics, and photographic records from the mid-1800s into the early 1900s, something disturbing starts to surface. It's not just about what exists, but about what's absent. The lack of proper explanations, the holes in our historical documentation. Something deeply troubling dawned on me. The narrative we've received about everyday existence in the 1800s doesn't align with the tangible proof. Not with the structures still standing. Not with the infrastructure buried under our modern streets. Not with the photographs revealing a world far more advanced than what we've been taught to accept. That's when I shifted my approach. Instead of asking whether Tartaria was real, I wondered what everyday existence would have been like in a society that left these monuments behind. This exploration examines what life might have truly resembled during an era we're told was primitive, pre-industrial, and underdeveloped. An age when, based on official records, most folks existed in filth, traveled on horseback, sent letters for communication, and constructed things with basic implements. Yet when you study what's actually left behind, the roads with their flawless grading, the canals with their exact engineering, the structures with their mathematical precision, something else reveals itself. Not a picture of primitive hardship, but of organized transit. Not separation, but connectivity. Not basic simplicity, but complex systems we've somehow lost the ability to identify. What did everyday existence look like in this erased world? What were people's actual activities? How did they travel, labor, conduct business, and exist within buildings that appear designed for functions we can't grasp anymore? The mainstream story falls apart the second you raise these concerns. Picture yourself awakening in a Tartarian metropolis at sunrise, not in some idealized historical fantasy, but in the real physical environments that still exist. The residential towers with their absurd ceiling heights reaching 12, 14, even 16 feet, way beyond anything practical for heating purposes. The windows stretching so tall they look built for giants, or maybe for something completely different. Light dispersal, air movement, atmospheric pressure management. You get up in a space with crown molding so complex that contemporary craftspeople would need months to duplicate it. Plasterwork flowing like water frozen in time. Geometric designs repeating with mathematical accuracy across thousands of structures in dozens of metropolitan areas spanning multiple continents. All supposedly constructed by separate contractors operating independently, all somehow reaching identical conclusions. Ask yourself how that's even possible. The dawn light comes through windows placed not haphazardly, but intentionally calibrated with solar angles computed for seasonal shifts. The whole building seems designed around natural elements, airflow, sunlight, water movement, in ways our contemporary structures completely disregard. You get dressed in garments visible in old photographs, formal attire, multi-layered, purposefully made. Not crude homemade fabric, but factory-produced textiles indicating industrial-scale manufacturing. Cotton shipped from India, silk transported from Asia, wool brought from Australia, all accessible in remote towns thousands of miles from where they were made. All delivered with remarkable consistency, as though transported via distribution systems far more advanced than horse-drawn carts could possibly maintain. The question becomes unavoidable. What kind of infrastructure enabled this? If this investigation resonates with you, think about subscribing or joining as a member. This type of examination requires hundreds of hours in archives most professional historians never explore. Your backing allows me to keep pursuing the questions mainstream history won't touch. You walk outside into streets that present their own puzzles. Not dirt trails, not randomly arranged cobblestones, but meticulously graded thoroughfares with drainage networks so advanced they're still operational today, more than 100 years later. Storm drains linking to subterranean systems stretching for miles, sewage infrastructure rivaling modern design, water distribution channels that delivered pressurized flow to whole cities, all supposedly constructed within just a few decades, all around the globe, all adhering to the same engineering principles. The streets themselves expose the design, too broad for basic wagon movement, too precisely oriented with cardinal points to be random. In metropolis after metropolis, you discover the same configuration. Wide boulevards extending from central hubs, forming geometric arrangements only visible from the sky. Star shapes, radial layouts, mathematical exactness suggesting centralized planning on a magnitude we're told never existed. And the activity along these avenues, this is where the mainstream account becomes utterly unsustainable. Images from the 1860s, 1870s, and 1880s reveal streets packed with movement. Not disorganized medieval chaos, but regulated traffic flow. Streetcars operating on tracks with electric or cable networks demanding enormous infrastructure spending. Buses following established routes, suggesting coordinated timetables. Horse carriages, certainly, but moving within an organized framework, not wandering aimlessly. The further I investigated, the more proof I discovered of transit networks we've been taught only came later. Railway systems in hundreds of metropolitan areas by the 1880s, cable car operations requiring underground equipment, elevated rail lines in major hubs, all emerging with suspicious timing, all demanding engineering knowledge supposedly non-existent. Who organized all this? Who designed it? Who had the surveying skills, the mathematical expertise, the administrative ability to roll out identical networks across different continents? The silence in our historical documentation is overwhelming. But the roads were just one network. The waterways unveil something even stranger. I dedicated months to studying canal documentation across Europe, Asia, and North America. Not the well-known ones like the Erie Canal or the Suez, but the thousands of smaller channels linking cities, settlements, and manufacturing centers. The system was enormous, coordinated, and expertly engineered with lock mechanisms, water level controls, and seasonal flow adjustments. China's Grand Canal, exceeding 1,000 miles, linking major river networks, transporting cargo and passengers with an efficiency that wouldn't be equaled until railroads arrived. The canal systems throughout the Netherlands, Belgium, and northern France. Hundreds of miles of connected channels with uniform measurements indicating cohesive planning. Britain's canal infrastructure at its height, 4,000 miles of navigable routes, all constructed in approximately 60 years, all compatible, all precisely leveled. This wasn't basic infrastructure. This was systematic engineering. Barges traveled these waterways hauling freight we can verify through harbor documentation. Grain from inland regions, factory products from urban centers, raw resources heading to manufacturing plants. The quantities were astonishing. Individual barges transporting loads needing dozens of wagons, networks shifting thousands of tons every day, all synchronized through schedules, collection points, and transfer hubs implying central management. And here's the most peculiar aspect. The technical knowledge needed to operate these systems was remarkable. Water management spanning hundreds of miles, lock mechanisms coordinated to permit transit, pumping facilities to elevate water against gravity, reservoir networks, to handle seasonal changes. Where did this knowledge originate? How did it propagate so quickly? Why does the historical documentation reveal no experimental phase, no trial period, but instead fully developed systems appearing almost at once? The design repeats with disturbing consistency. Past the waterways, past the streets, another framework functioned. The overland trading paths, which we're told were crude merchant tracks, were actually advanced movement corridors. The Silk Road wasn't one pathway, but a web of routes with fixed stations, water access points, and rest locations set at exact distances. Not chance stopping places, but deliberate infrastructure. Russian records reference caravans traversing Central Asia with hundreds of camels transporting merchandise worth enormous sums, operating on timetables demanding coordination spanning thousands of miles. These weren't roaming traders. These were structured operations moving through established frameworks. The stations along these pathways raised their own concerns. Caravans throughout Persia, Central Asia, and Turkey. Enormous buildings with open areas able to shelter hundreds of people and animals. Water networks, warehousing capabilities, protective barriers, all constructed to matching designs as though adhering to architectural guidelines spread across empires. Within these buildings, you discover traces of the commerce itself. Chinese products showing up in European marketplaces, European manufactured items reaching Asian metropolitan areas, African commodities dispersed across continents, all flowing through systems requiring organization, we're told, was absent. The logistical challenge becomes staggering. How do you synchronize transit across continents lacking communication infrastructure? How do you create trade benchmarks, monetary conversion, legal enforcement spanning language and cultural divides? How do you transport precious cargo thousands of miles through various territories without unified governance? The mainstream answer that this somehow developed naturally crumbles when examined. And then there's the matter of airships. This is the point where traditional historians dismiss everything, where the recorded proof becomes too uncomfortable to face, but the documentation exists. Patent filings for dirigibles, balloons, lighter-than-air vehicles throughout the mid-1800s, press reports of aerial displays, technical publications discussing drive systems, gas manufacturing, navigation methods, photographs revealing buildings that could only serve as airship docking facilities, high masts atop structures, securing mechanisms, raised landing areas. I'm not suggesting enormous fleets. I'm not proposing regular aerial trade, but the proof points to testing, advancement, and restricted deployment of lighter-than-air transit that's been deliberately removed from accepted historical accounts. Why would that be? Think about what it means. If even restricted airship travel occurred, it transforms everything regarding information spread, surveillance capabilities, and rapid movement of elites. It indicates a degree of technical advancement incompatible with the backward story we've accepted. The structures themselves suggest this possibility. Rooftop additions with unclear functions, raised platforms on governmental structures, design features that only make logical sense if you picture them as docking or securing points for aerial vehicles. Once you recognize it, it becomes impossible to ignore. Reports from World's Fairs, the Paris Exposition, the Chicago Columbian Exposition mention aerial exhibitions, tethered balloons lifting passengers, conversations about future aerial travel. Then past 1900, these mentions mostly vanish. Not because the innovation failed, but because something shifted in how we recorded technological progress. What occurred? What transformed? Why does the historical documentation display such a sharp break? But everyday existence occurred inside these buildings, and that's where the puzzle intensifies. The structures themselves show functions we've been conditioned to overlook. Not merely residences, not just manufacturing plants, but areas designed for particular uses we can't identify anymore. The basements go far deeper than needed for keeping things. Multiple underground levels with brick archways, water removal systems, unexplained equipment attachment points. Mainstream history labels them cellars or foundation areas, but the construction is too intentional. Sealed rooms, pressure-resistant barriers, connection spots for conduits leading to unknown places. The ground floors display proof of integrated systems we've stripped out and forgotten. Wall gaps too large for basic utilities, shaft networks rising through several stories, central open spaces with glass roofs looking like light sources, but built with such exactness they must have had extra functions. The higher floors raise their own issues, ceiling heights that reduce as you climb upward. Why would that be? Ventilation networks far more complex than needed for basic air exchange. Rooftop additions with celestial orientations suggesting observation or measurement uses, and everywhere the decorative work. Not aesthetic additions, but mathematical designs, geometric sequences, symbol systems repeating across continents. Mainstream history brushes this off as building fashion, but the exactness implies significance we've misplaced. The pattern of everyday labor exposes the most disturbing irregularities. The manufacturing plants visible in photographs aren't crude workshops. They're huge buildings with floor-to-ceiling equipment, precision instruments, production systems demanding coordination among hundreds of employees. The manufacturing capacity emerges instantly, with no gradual period, no slow mechanization. Fabric mills in New England generating millions of yards of material yearly by the 1830s, steel production facilities in Germany functioning at industrial volume by the 1850s, pottery factories in England, glassworks in Bohemia, chemical operations in France, all emerging within decades, all demanding knowledge supposedly missing. The labor force creates its own riddle. Images reveal employees in these locations dressed professionally, running sophisticated equipment with clear competence. Where did the instruction come from? How did thousands of employees across various sectors simultaneously gain specialized capabilities? The mainstream narrative talks about industrial transformation, about slow technical advancement, about creators and business owners pushing innovation. But the tangible proof points to something else. Systems already in place, infrastructure given new purposes, innovation deployed instead of developed. Within these manufacturing plants, you discover equipment that shouldn't be there. Exact metalworking tools needing tolerances measurable in thousandths of an inch. Hydraulic networks functioning at pressures contemporary engineers take seriously. Electrical production machinery showing up decades ahead of Edison. Chemical methods demanding understanding of molecular arrangements, supposedly undiscovered. And the synchronization between locations. Uniform components emerging in the 1850s, exchangeable parts made in various cities and nations, all fitting together. Production line methods appearing at once in several sectors, all demanding systems analysis, unified planning, and information sharing we're told was absent. The proof points to something far bigger than solo creativity. Everyday business in these cities exposes the greatest puzzle. Commercial centers functioning with price alignment spanning continents. Merchandise delivered from thousands of miles with dependable frequency. Monetary conversion networks enabling deals across numerous currency standards, credit tools, commercial bills, business agreements suggesting advanced financial frameworks. This wasn't simple exchange. This wasn't basic commerce. This was unified trade demanding information infrastructure. We're told only arrived with telegraph and telephone, Yet the documentation reveals synchronized pricing, coordinated product flows, profit opportunities seized across ocean distances, all prior to electronic messaging. How is that possible? The commercial structures themselves provide part of the explanation. Impressive buildings with temperature management networks, cooling abilities, warehousing designed for particular merchandise. Not basic vendor stalls, but structured trading floors with management systems, governing structures, and uniform measurements. The more I dug, the more proof I located of business systems functioning with mechanical regularity. Tea from China reaching London as scheduled, cotton from America handled in Manchester factories, grain from Ukraine supplying European populations, all flowing through frameworks demanding synchronization that appears unachievable without contemporary infrastructure. And the monetary tools, credit notes accepted across empires, coverage agreements protecting global shipments, investment groups backing ventures on several continents, all needing confidence, confirmation, and enforcement systems suggesting institutional frameworks we've been taught were missing. The coordination challenge becomes mathematically unexplainable through traditional reasoning. The matter of social structure uncovers multiple mysteries. Mainstream history depicts the 1800s as an age of developing democracy, fading aristocracy, and expanding middle class. But the tangible proof, the structures, the infrastructure, the coordination of enormous ventures suggests governing ability far exceeding what elected leadership supposedly controlled. Who designed the cities? Who synchronized the waterway systems? Who unified the railroad networks? Who implemented the business rules? The structures offer hints, governing buildings in every significant city, commanding edifices with documentation centers, messaging hubs, and meeting spaces, not crude municipal buildings, but advanced bureaucratic facilities, suggesting extensive administrative apparatus. Association groups emerge constantly in the documentation. Commerce guilds, expert societies, fraternal clubs, intellectual associations, all functioning across borders, all keeping correspondence, all apparently coordinating work beyond political divisions. The design suggests alternative power structures, not substituting for formal governments, but functioning alongside them, managing the frameworks that enabled everyday existence. Standards, organizations, expert credentials, technical guidelines. These groups left scarce records. Their operations were treated as private business, but their impact shows in the consistency of results, matching construction regulations across countries, uniform technical methods on various continents, synchronized answers to engineering problems. When you chart these connections, when you follow the links between metropolitan areas, organizations, and ventures, an image develops of governing capability that mainstream history can't account for. Everyday cultural existence raises issues historians would rather dodge. Concepts propagated too rapidly. Building fashions emerging at once in far-flung cities. Musical movements appearing in several nations within months. Writing trends, philosophical ideas, and scientific concepts distributed across continents with questionable speed before telegraph, before telephone, before wireless. The mainstream answer points to postal networks, journeying scholars, and printed periodicals. But the chronology doesn't add up. The simultaneity is too exact. Look at the world's fairs. Enormous global exhibitions coordinating involvement from numerous countries, showcasing innovations supposedly in early stages, demonstrating governing capacity needing years of preparation and messaging. The 1851 Crystal Palace Exhibition, the 1889 Paris Exposition, the 1893 Chicago Columbian Exposition, all involving worldwide coordination on magnitudes that appear unachievable. The structures built for these shows unveil the deepest riddle. Supposedly temporary buildings, yet constructed with lasting exactness. The Crystal Palace, almost 1 million square feet of glass and steel, assembled in months, then taken apart and moved. The Paris exhibition buildings, complex structures spanning hundreds of acres, materializing as though summoned, then vanishing from historical documentation. Where did the know-how originate? Where did it disappear to? Cultural outputs themselves reveal the design. Musical scores released at once in New York, London, Paris, and Vienna. Publications emerging in various languages within weeks. Clothing movements spreading across seas before images could record them. Scientific breakthroughs declared in separate nations on identical days. The proof points to information-sharing networks we've been taught were missing. As the shift ended and folks headed home, they arrived in areas filled with innovations that shouldn't be there. Gas illumination requiring subterranean delivery systems, interior water access linked to pressurized networks, climate control with automatic adjustments, air exchange systems managing air purity, all supposedly basic yet built with complexity. Contemporary structures barely achieve. The gas networks alone create massive questions. How do you deliver flammable gas securely through hundreds of miles of buried conduits? How do you manage pressure throughout a system supplying thousands of structures? How do you address seasonal usage changes? How do you stop leaks, blasts, and pollution? Yet by the 1850s, major metropolitan areas had these frameworks completely functional. Not trial versions, not evolving, but established infrastructure supplying whole communities. The water frameworks display even more advanced construction. Storage facility building demanding land studies, channel networks covering dozens of miles, purification operations using chemical methods, delivery systems with pressure management, flow oversight, and contamination blocking, all emerging within decades across numerous cities, adhering to the same standards. Inside residences, the proof of synchronization persists. Uniform fixtures, matching connections, exchangeable components, all indicating factory alignment, delivery frameworks, and business systems functioning at manufacturing volume before the supposed industrial transformation reached completion. The home environment unveils the ultimate impossibility. How did regular folks doing regular work pay for these innovations? How did frameworks needing enormous financial backing supply middle-income communities? How did systems requiring ongoing upkeep, expert handling, and technical assistance become widespread? The financial aspects don't make sense unless something essential is absent from our grasp. Once night fell, the metropolis changed. Street illumination showed up far sooner than mainstream history admits. Not crude oil fixtures, but structured systems with unified oversight, matching equipment, and synchronized upkeep. By the 1860s, significant cities had street lighting frameworks spanning miles of main roads. The energy sources create instant concerns. Gas needed subterranean delivery, electrical needed production locations, delivery systems, and power management. Arc lighting needed exact machinery, carbon components, and current oversight. All supposedly in early testing, yet installed at metropolitan magnitude. Images from that time displayed nighttime movement incompatible with crude lighting, avenues packed with movement after sunset, business areas functioning late, communal areas lit for protection and direction, all demanding framework spending that appears financially unachievable. And the structures themselves reveal puzzles. Glass panels radiating interior brightness, fueled by networks we're told were hardly experimental. Complete fronts illuminated for presentation or guidance. Rooftop illumination detectable for miles indicating travel or communication functions. Who synchronized this? Who paid for it? Who had the technical understanding to roll out electrical frameworks decades before Edison, Tesla, and Westinghouse supposedly introduced the innovation? The design continues. Established networks emerging without recorded creation, expanding without clear spreading process, functioning with knowledge that appears passed down instead of discovered. This leads us to the key issue this examination can't dodge. What became of the understanding? Not just technical understanding, construction standards, factory methods, and coordination guidelines, but the mental structures that enabled these frameworks. The comprehension of how to structure cities, relocate communities, distribute merchandise, and manage business across continents. The break is sharp. Look at technical publications from the 1880s, and you discover advanced conversations about hydraulic frameworks, air pressure uses, and power delivery systems. By 1920, these conversations have mostly disappeared, substituted by alternative frameworks, alternative premises, and alternative innovations. It's as though a complete knowledge foundation was deliberately substituted. Construction methods reveal the identical design. 19th century buildings show building approaches we can't recreate affordably anymore. Not because we're missing equipment, but because we've misplaced the complete understanding of substance characteristics, building standards, and unified design analysis that enabled those structures. The infrastructure shows it most obviously. We dig up basements and locate system networks we can't comprehend. We tear down structures and uncover mechanical devices we can't recognize. We study water control frameworks and acknowledge technical advancement we have difficulty matching. This wasn't crude innovation slowly advancing. This was advanced understanding deliberately erased. Question why that would happen. Why would sophisticated abilities be discarded? Why would productive frameworks be substituted with worse options? Why would synchronized systems be taken apart, favoring divided answers? The mainstream story provides no responses because it rejects the foundation. We're told nothing was forfeited, that advancement moved directly ahead, that every era developed upon the last with continuous improvement. But the tangible proof disputes this entirely. What did everyday existence feel like as this understanding vanished? Picture experiencing the shift. Maturing in metropolitan areas with thorough infrastructure, synchronized frameworks, and advanced innovations, then observing them taken apart, substituted, and erased. Witnessing the waterway systems discarded for railroads, the gas frameworks replaced by worse electrical networks. The building understanding lost as uniform building replaced unified planning. The documentation from the early 1900s holds suggestions of this, objections about declining services, longing for superior times, mentions of abilities that existed in recent memory but were unavailable anymore. Elderly citizens recalling when the avenues were tidier, the water cleaner, the atmosphere less contaminated, when frameworks functioned smoothly instead of demanding ongoing interference, when metropolitan areas appeared designed instead of randomly grown. But these perspectives were pushed aside, rejected as sentimental remembering of a fictional history. The advancement story required that everything improve constantly. Any indication that abilities had been forfeited challenged the core narrative of contemporary life. So the understanding dimmed. The abilities vanished. The grasp of unified systems analysis yielded to focused knowledge in smaller fields. The complete method to metropolitan planning was substituted by individual purpose answers, and within one era the recollection dimmed enough that we could examine the passed-down infrastructure and assert we constructed it. Examine the advanced construction and label it crude. Examine the synchronized frameworks and claim they developed randomly. The pattern of erasure has its own force. Once started, it gains speed. Currently, you can still observe the proof if you understand where to search. The structures that haven't been updated beyond recognition. The subterranean infrastructure revealed during building ventures. The waterway network still detectable in overhead pictures. The railroad paths that trace orientations too exact for experimental measuring. The avenue configurations that show geometric designs from overhead. Travel through older metropolitan areas with this viewpoint, and the irregularities become crushing. Structure after structure displaying abilities that don't fit the mainstream chronology. Infrastructure after infrastructure showing synchronization that shouldn't be there. Framework after framework. Presenting advancement, we're told, arrived afterward. The design stays uniform. What stays behind is more sophisticated than what substituted it. 19th century train facilities with sound construction contemporary designers have difficulty matching. Victorian water frameworks with pressure management today's infrastructure can't equal. Manufacturing structures with organic temperature regulation, mechanized networks fail to replicate. This isn't sentimentality. This isn't sentimental remembering. This is quantifiable, recordable, tangible proof that the story of steady advancement is essentially incomplete. Something was there, something advanced, something synchronized, something we've been conditioned never existed. And the issue becomes inescapable. What more have we erased? I started this examination planning to record everyday existence in a historical time I assumed I grasped. I uncovered instead a riddle that expands with every archive explored, every image studied, every structure measured. What was existence like in the metropolitan areas we label Tartarian? It was, the proof indicates, more synchronized than we've been informed, more advanced than mainstream history recognizes, more linked than the accessible innovation supposedly permitted. Folks traveled through frameworks we can hardly understand, labored with innovations we've lost the ability to duplicate, existed in areas planned for functions we can't identify anymore, took part in systems of business, messaging, and structure that appear unachievable without abilities we're told we're missing. And then something shifted. Not destructively, not immediately, but deliberately, purposefully, as though intentional. The understanding dimmed. The frameworks were broken down. The infrastructure discarded or given new functions. The grasp of how everything functioned collectively vanished into darkness. Within several eras, we couldn't recall. We examined what stayed and created fresh narratives to rationalize it. Narratives that matched our chosen story of advancement, of creativity, of steady progress from crude to contemporary. But the structures recall. The avenues recall. The waterways, the railroads, the subterranean systems, they all recall an alternative narrative. A narrative of synchronization lacking messaging infrastructure, structure lacking electronic frameworks, advanced construction lacking contemporary equipment, worldwide systems lacking present-day transit. A narrative we've been deliberately conditioned to erase. The issue isn't whether this reality was there. The proof is massive and tangible and undismissible. The issue is why we've been so committed to ignoring it. Why does recognizing advanced 19th century abilities challenge our contemporary sense of self? Why must we claim that everything preceding us was crude, restricted, and undeveloped? Why can't we acknowledge that understanding is occasionally forfeited, that society occasionally erases, that advancement isn't constantly direct? What are we defending by keeping the mainstream story? And more concerning, what more have we erased? What other abilities were there that we can't identify anymore? What other frameworks functioned that we've trained ourselves to miss? The structures remain awaiting somebody to raise the proper concerns. The infrastructure stays silent evidence to understanding we've lost. The images maintain instances from a reality we assert never was. But it was there. Folks existed in it, labored in it, traveled through it regularly, constructed existences within frameworks we've persuaded ourselves were unachievable. And somewhere in the records, in the basement holding areas, in the abandoned technical publications, the proof awaits. The confirmation builds up. The design becomes impossible to reject. Once you observe it, you can't stop observing it. The sole remaining issue is whether we're prepared to examine. This examination persists. The records are extensive, the proof abundant, the concerns expanding. If you wish to back this examination, think about joining or subscribing. Because the more we examine, the more we locate that history isn't what we've been informed. And that reality, maybe, is what we've been erasing all this time. Where are you watching this video from? Write in the comments which city or country you are from. We would love to know who is watching with us. Share your thoughts, observations, or questions. Every comment is important. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss any new videos. Together, we are creating a community of curious explorers.